workshop. Thanks again for being here. So we have 4 papers. At the end, just one will be, let's say, on site, because unfortunately, Jouke van Dijk cannot here, but still he will present. So thanks, Jouke, for being willing to present anyway. So in the first presentation, we have José Victor Giarola from Maastricht University. Then in the second one, we have Jouke van Dijk and from the University of Groningen. Then Arnaud Mertens, excuse me, from LISER. And then in the last presentation, there will be Eduardo Medeiros from the Instituto Universitário de Lisboa. So I think we can almost start. You have around 25 minutes for presentation and then questions and answers.
Yeah, if I'm running out of time, just let me know, okay? So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me here. Thank you very much for putting this together. Today I'm going to present my paper on the impact of cultural distance on the distribution of workers across the border. And this is a joint work with my 2 supervisors from Maastricht University, Frank and Hans. So here is the outline of what we'll be doing today. I'll start with a brief motivation, talk a little bit of the literature review, and the contributions that we try to frame our paper on, a little bit on the identification strategy, of course, a simple framework to analyze our cross-border flows. And yeah, talk a little bit about the data. That it's one of the points that we want to sell in this paper, the results and conclusions. So yeah, the main question that we want to answer here is what prevents labor mobility in Europe. Economists thought like in the past it was a consensus that markets would adjust to optimally achieve the equilibrium, and the whole EU integration was based on the free movement of goods, services, and labor. And what policymakers and economists also thought it was by removing these institutional barriers, you would foster labor mobility across regions in Europe. And of course, this higher labor mobility would lead to some efficient gains by decreasing disparities and increasing benefits, of course. However, this is not quite well what we see. So if we look at within country mobility or NUTS2 mobility within a country, 8.3% of the working population actually cross NUTS2 borders to work. And when we look at cross-border mobility, national cross-border, this value drops to 0.6% only. So this paper, what we try to do here is to explore the economic and non-economic drivers on labor mobility across Europe. And more specifically, the way we frame here is how culture affects the distribution of workers across the border. The way we do that is by exploiting a unique administrative data on cross-border mobility from Belgium, Flanders region to the Netherlands. So we basically have information on every individual that crosses the border from Belgium to work in the Netherlands. And we also use some historical data that I will explain a little bit more in detail to try to capture these non-economic drivers. So when we look at the literature of culture in economics, we can divide this by 2 types of definitions. So the theoretical definition, that is a distinction between values and beliefs. So some authors would define culture as a set of beliefs about the consequence of one's action, while others would define culture as a set of values that you acquire in form of prescriptions on how you should behave, depending on the group that you belong to. The definition that we will rely on, it's mostly on this empirical definition, and I think that it makes sense to not make a distinction between values and beliefs. And the main reason here is to empirically estimate that, because it would be extremely hard to disentangle both variables. So the way we define culture, and this is going to be extremely important for the development of our paper, is how culture is the intergenerational transmission of values and beliefs that hardly change over time. So when we look at the literature on specifically culture and mobility, we can define on international mobility and internal mobility. And again, we can divide these two subgroups into the migration models and commuting models. The ones that study migration models on the international setup, normally they use rough measures of culture, such as sharing the same language or the same legal origins, with some exceptions, as this below paper by in 2012, where they use 5 different indexes to actually calculate how different countries are from each other, culturally speaking. When we look at internal mobility, however, we have migration models that use more explicit measures of culture, especially this one by Alesina, where they use like how family ties influence the mobility in the labor market mobility of second-generation migrants in the US. Falk 2012 is one of the most related papers that we have to our, and they use historical dialect in Germany to see how historical dialect regions were cultural similar to each other in the past, and they use this to sort of like a proxy for cultural similarity nowadays. And when we look at commuting models, however, we basically have only the economic drivers there in the international setup or in the internal mobility. Normally, they only look at like, wage differentials or unemployment differentials or the implementation of an infrastructure connection between the regions that would decrease commuting costs. Or the public policy differentials, like such in the US, minimum wage differential across states. But we don't see much about culture and cross-border commuting, and this is exactly what we try to do here. And the reason that we spot was that this paucity of empirical evidence is due to the lack of suitable data to study international cross-border movements with measures of culture that would provide enough variation at a fine scale. So we try to say that our contributions is first of all to bring together this study of culture and international commuting, and mainly by exploiting a unique administrative data on cross-border commuting from Belgium to the Netherlands. And we do that also by relying on explicit measures of culture that vary across and within countries. So our identification strategy faced the problems that how to properly measure culture. So we don't have a variable that would properly measure culture, contemporaneous culture at a fine scale, because survey data that are normally used to measure culture in economics, they would provide some variation at the country level, and in the best scenario, they would provide some variation at the NUTS2 level. But we need some variation at a fine scale, because cross-border commutings, they tend to take place in short distance. So the other problem that we have is, of course, that cultural similarity increases mobility, and that's what we try to explain here. But the more mobility you have between these two regions, the more likely they are to increase cultural similarity between them. So what we do is that we rely heavily on the definition of culture, that is this empirical definition, that is the intergenerational transmission of values and beliefs that hardly change over time. And we say, okay, so if we find a historical measure of culture that can proxy for contemporaneous culture, these just need to fulfill 2 requirements, that it's to be correlated with contemporaneous culture, and at the same time does not impose any barrier to commuting. So the variable that we chose was like historical dialects, and the reason is this does not impose a communication barrier today that would prevent commuting from these two regions. And at the same time, language is correlated with the evolution of ideas from earlier generations. So our model, it's a simple gravity model, like commuting flows from origin region O to destination region D, depending on some push and pull factors from the origin and destination, and some specific commuting costs. And we include in this specific per region commuting costs, the geographical distance. And this is going to be a linear combination of the cultural distance that I will explain a little bit later. Our push and pull equations just, it's a log linear function of like some regional specific characteristics and the potential out commuters for the origin region and the destination region workers. So we just substitute like equation 2, 3, and 4 into 1. We get to equation 5. We log linearize that, and we end up with our final empirical estimation equation. So the database that we use here, it's basically CBS administrative data that is like the statistical department in the Netherlands, where we have cross-border commuting flows for every individual in Belgium to the Netherlands in 2017. And we have precise information on the origin and destination municipality. We have some other background characteristics of these individuals as well. And as I mentioned, this data covers the Netherlands and the Belgian Flanders parts. We also use some historical Dutch census data that I will explain why later, and some data from the National Statistical Office on the regional characteristics. Of course, we need to get like the distance between these two regions, and that's why we also use the Eurostat geo data to calculate the geo coordinates between the two regions and properly have a measure of geographical distance. So these are the commuting flows from Belgium to the Netherlands. So each red dot in Belgium represents a origin region with a positive commuting flow, and each yellow dot there would represent a destination region in the Netherlands. And the thicker it is, this dot, the more people come from that specific region. So for our cultural analysis here, we use the Rijks Netherlands dialects, and this database covers 361 dialects in the regions of the Netherlands and Belgium Flanders, where we have around like 250 different dialects in the Netherlands and 110 more or less in Belgium. And they were collected through the years of 1922 and 1975. So the transcripts were collected 125 words, and it was calculated the distance in the sound component. So like basically how cost it is for you to change your pronunciation from one dialect to the other. So we have like a matrix of 361 by 361 dialects where we calculate this. Well, I didn't calculate. We use Wilbert's database here, and he calculated the distance between each of the dialects against each other. So what we do here is that, we assign the closest centroid from the origin region to the closest centroid of this dialect, and we say that this will be like it will be the definition of culture for that specific region. And then if he commutes to a destination region, we know the dialect in the destination region that we calculate this cultural distance between these two regions. So this is just a graphical representation of like the variation within and across countries in the Netherlands and Belgium. Again, it was not me that produced this map. It was also from Wilbert that he was kind to provide to me. And so then we go to the results. I estimate like equation 6 by means of Poisson pseudo maximum likelihood, because we have 95% of the pair origin destination regions with zero commuting flows. So what we do is that we start with just regressing like commuting flows on this cultural distance variable, and then we start to add controls and fixed effect on the NUTS2 fixed effect. And we end up with an elasticity of minus 0.49. And translating this to more clear results with like a 1 standard deviation increase in our cultural difference variable would decrease by 7.7% the commuting flow between two regions. So we also perform several robustness checks to validate our results. And I start this table here by considering like a dummy variable for regions that are border regions, because they might have like a better connectiveness. But there is also, it's also true that closed regions, they are also more cultural similar, but then individuals might commute not because they are cultural similar, but just because they have better connectivity. And the results remain robust to these specifications. Another specification here that we try to implement is sectoral composition. So how different the economic structures between regions are to each other. And yeah, because regions that are cultural similar to each other, they also tend to be more similar in the economic structures. And then individuals would be commuting through these regions, not because of the cultural similarity, but because of the economic structure. And yeah, the results remain fairly stable across the specifications as well. Yeah, another robustness that we do here is that if you remember the map that I showed with commuters, there were some commuters commuting flows happening from really far away from the border. And yeah, these regions are naturally also more cultural dissimilar to each other. So this might be leading our results to what we have. But then what we do is we set to 0 all the commuting flows that are more than 100 kilometers of distance or more than 150 kilometers of distance. And again, there's no differences between the results. Another robustness that we do here is, the settlement of Belgians in the past. So that's why we use our historical Dutch census data, because these Belgians that immigrate to the Netherlands in the past, they will influence the culture in that past, but at the same time they might also influence some network nowadays, and that's what we try to avoid here. Again, the specifications continue to be like on the same level of as before. The last robustness that we do here, it's on the housing price effect. So as you can possibly imagine, there are many Dutch individuals that move right across the border just to enjoy lower prices of housing. And then, yeah, this would definitely lead to more cultural similarity between the regions, because they move just across the border. And what would be leading these commuting flows was actually housing prices and not like how cultural similar these regions are. But again, the results remain robust to all these specifications. So our conclusions here are that, yeah, first the elasticity is minus 0.49, and this would lead to a decrease of 7.7% in the commuting flows between regions. And this effect of cultural dissimilarity is about like a 3.3% in size of the geographical distance one when evaluated at the mean, with one standard deviation increase in each of the measures. So we would expect that anyway, because geographical distance should matter a lot when you decide to commute. But we also show that cultural dissimilarity also plays a significant role in shaping this distribution of workers across the border. And our results, they vary depending on the specifications, and this 7.7, it's our baseline result, but it also varies from 12 to 5.5 depending on the specification. Yeah, thank you very much. That's it.
So thanks a lot for the presentation and for the timing. We actually have time for questions. Is there any question from the floor or audience? One over there.
Yeah, thank you. Just to understand, so you cultural directly, you don't like an ID. So the question is why, and if you check how much of the variation of the current culture.
Yeah, the whole problem here was that we didn't find any variable that would measure culture at a fine scale the way we need. Because the first idea when I started this project was exactly to find a variable, explain culture, and nowadays, Spanish culture, and then we would instrument with these historical dialects. But the problem is that we didn't find this variable. The best that we could find was the variation at the NUTS2 level, like the fixed effect there, we would somehow lose.
At least you can check the NUTS2 level, how much.
Yeah, but like for instance, we have many dialects within the NUTS2 level, so like then which one I will explain the variation there. So yeah, no, then yeah, we kind of like went to another direction that was exactly to rely heavily on this on the definition of culture, that is something that hardly changes over time, and argue that the past dialects that do not impose any communication barrier today that would prevent commuting flows. Yeah, that's the way we try to deal with.
But then I have another question. After that, the language change, this graphical distance, cultural distance.
They are correlated. Something like 55.
Yeah, so maybe you can also add the interaction.
I can try to. Yeah, I haven't added the interaction in any of the specifications through. I only control for. Yeah. Yeah.
And the last thing, and then I finish it, is for Italy, for example, a lot of cultural variation is explained by the past domination. I don't know if you have something similar in Netherlands, but that might be a success.
Yeah, I mean, this was also our idea to also control for this, trade routes in the past that might like also create routes nowadays that would reinforce routes nowadays. So yeah, this is definitely an idea. We still haven't found the data, but it is in the back of our mind to do such analysis.
So I can go ahead. Yeah. So you look at the effect of culture on mobility, and say that there is also literature on mobility, the effect of culture, this cultural analysis or destination, and you use the census data to control. Excellent. But the other point I had is that, okay, you know the place of residence of commuters and the place of work.
Mm-hmm.
Suppose that I want to work in the Netherlands, I'm going to try to live as close as possible from the border.
Yeah.
And you are going to link me to the dialect of the place of residence in which I'm living today. I'm commuting today, so I'm living close to the border. But my origin is not that village. I'm coming from the east of Belgium, let's say, Waregem or Ghent, where the dialect is very different from the one in Turnhout or Antwerpen when I'm living today. So how do you deal with this?
Yeah, to be honest, like I haven't taken this into consideration, but we have in this database, it's possible to link past addresses because the Dutch, when you have like the Dutch data on this administrative data, I mean, it's not going to be perfect, like because normally some people will not report to the Dutch authorities perfectly all their movements. But if they start their contact with the Netherlands and then they move regions around, then we can basically know where they were before they start to work in that, before they move to that region and start to work in the Netherlands.
But you don't have data on the village of origin or the region of origin of these guys?
No, the village of origin, no, we would only have once they have the first contact, and then we can see if this first contact was like in 2013, for instance, and if this 2013 contact was in a different region than the one in 2017, we can try to do something with that, but precise information on where they were born, no.
I think it's a point on which you have to insist a bit or do some business because it's a key point.
True.
In your
True.
identification.
It's true. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for this nice presentation. And apart of perhaps presenting the results with the full set of controls, because I think that it's interesting to consider each channel separately, it would be nice to have a robustness check considering all of them at the same time, even if they are high collinearity.
Yeah, I've done that. I just didn't present here, but yeah, I included all of them and the results remain. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Fairly stable.
And the second question is about the possibility of introducing or considering non-linear effects, both on cultural diversity and perhaps distance. And distance is relatively standard, but in terms of cultural diversity, it would be nice to see if there is a threshold through which cultural distance is really relevant, because I understand that minor differences are, can be easily solved, but there is a point when okay, the problem is so relevant that you decide not to commute.
Yeah, I haven't checked that, like, but it's definitely a good idea. Thank you very much. It is.
I have a question too, if I may.
Yeah.
So as you probably know, Jan van Oers from the University of Rotterdam has several papers on the penalty for speaking Dutch dialects.
Yeah.
And therefore I was wondering if what really matters is distance with respect to standard Dutch. Because perhaps, you know, if you speak a dialect in some place of the Netherlands, you could be...
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah, yeah, I've read this paper. It's true. Yeah, I think that this database is actually available. If I ask the same source that calculate the distance across dialects, it might be possible to calculate the distance with the Dutch.
Well, if I will remember, the standard Dutch is the Dutch spoken in Haarlem, and therefore you may just you know, take up from the
the Haarlem dialect and yeah, compared to all the others. Yeah, that's a good idea. I haven't thought about that. Yeah, thanks.
What?
True.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe you have thought about it, but what about heterogeneity? So there are different types of jobs which would require higher communication skills or cultural proximity, etc. While some others you don't care.
Yeah.
Okay. So maybe just playing around with the with the results and look at what type of works or what type of occupations, I don't know, are more affected by this cultural distance. Maybe it's also
great.
Nice.
We have information just on the sector that they work. We would not have the information on the occupation, but we have wage of these individuals as well.
Exports, gender, I mean,
yeah.
Last section of the paper is heterogeneity.
Yeah, we can definitely add that. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Is there any other question? Maybe from the online audience? Question 1, 2, 3, 4. I think we can move ahead to the next presentation, which was scheduled to be on site, but at the end will be online.
Okay.
Okay, so Joke, you can already start whenever you want.
Okay, do you see my presentation on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, because I cannot see it. You have slide 1 now?
Yes.
We cannot see you, but we can see the slides.
Okay, and
Yeah, oh, you cannot
Okay.
see me. Okay. But now we can listen.
okay, and if I move the slide, it works?
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much for the invitation to join. If something goes wrong, I'm sure you will interrupt me. It's a pity that I cannot be at the faculty, although I'm in Barcelona, but due to some health issues, I have to stay in my room. The study I want to present is about cross-border commuting in neighboring European countries and if this reduces inequality. It's joint work with my colleagues from the University of Groningen, Arjen Edzes and Lourens Broersma. Why do we do this? Because cross-border issues are a big theme in Europe. You can think of the economy, but also safety, labor markets, migration, governance issue, as we see now with Poland, a lot of Interreg projects, Brexit, etc. So cross-border issues are of importance. And we have from the theory that cross-border commuting can stimulate cross-border regional economic development by means of better matching, increasing economies of scale, agglomeration effects, and so it may solve discrepancies on cross-border labor markets on both sides of the border and thus reduce inequalities. However, now we have lack of insight in actual flows, but also lack of insight in the drivers and impact of cross-border commuting and policy. Now, what do we do in this paper? We have an explanatory analysis of commuter flows between neighboring EU countries. So we do not study commuting from Spain to Poland because they are not bordering. So we restrict to bordering countries. And we relate this to economic factors, wages and unemployment, accessibility, road density, language characteristics for various groups. And we estimate separate models by gender, education, age, and by economic sector. About some background, I think this is quite familiar. The European Union supports border regions and wants to support also cross-border commuting. A lot of European people live in these border regions, 1 out of 3, 150 million people, so quite a lot. And 2 million European citizens cross borders, workers and students, daily or weekly. So this is a substantial amount, as we heard yesterday, comparable with the number of air passengers. However, there are still some pitfalls. It doesn't work perfect. And there are some studies have been done that if 1/5 of the obstacles be removed, then this would benefit GDP plus 2% in border regions and create 1 million jobs. So cross-border, more cross-border commuting has potential. Now, what are the problems? Legislative processes. There are problems with pooling of healthcare facilities. Legal financial frameworks are different. So all kinds of institutional barriers prevent that cross-border migration goes easy and smoothly. So this is the broader idea, but first we want to have more insight in the processes itself. Now, there are already a lot of cross-border cooperation projects, as you see from this map of Interreg projects. Many border regions, I think nearly all border regions have this kind of Interreg projects to stimulate cross-border cooperation. What we see also is that over time cross-border commuting is increasing, but the flows are still small. As you see, we have these lines. The blue line is the EU, including Swiss. The other lines are without Swiss, and the green line is the EU 15, the old EU 15. So all lines are increasing, but still it's only a small part of the labor force who commutes cross-border. So the flows are small. It increases from 450,000 in 1998 till to 1.3 million in 2016. So it tripled, but it's still small because it's less than 0.6% of the labor force. What are the main questions in our study? What drives cross-border commuting? What is the impact and what is the effect on reducing inequalities? And we have data from Eurostat from 1998 till 2016. And the flows are between countries. Now we use various theoretical framework. The neoclassical framework, this is driven by differences in economic factors on both sides of the border, differences in wages and unemployment, and we assume a rational choice. However, other theories also, like the post-structural observations, they talk about mental thresholds, bandwidth of unfamiliarity, feel at home, common value patterns, and these are also of importance. Economic geographical models or uneven development and inequality models, they talk about push and pull factors with rational and emotional explanatory variables. So both the Homo economicus and the Homo socialis. Now we use a gravity model to handle these combinations. The specification of our model is as follows. We have commuting flows and we relate that to wage levels in the country of origin and destination, the same with unemployment. And we expect that high wages in the country of origin correspond to lower out commuting because the wages in the region where you are quite good. If wages are higher in the destination, this attracts more people. Unemployment is the opposite. High unemployment rates in the region of origin drive out people, and low unemployment rates in the region of destination attract more migrants. Row density is a bit more complicated. Row density in the country of destination might help because it leads to easier access to the labor market. In the region of origin, it's less clear because if you had good connections within the region, this might also make it easy to find a job within the region. So that's unclear. For distance, we expect that distance lowers my commuting flows. And as we heard before, language dummies are also important because similar language will make it easier to work in another country. Then we move to the estimation results. The estimation results, in the left column you see the results. Wages in origin have a negative coefficient, and wages in destination a positive coefficient, and that is what we expect. The same with unemployment. Unemployment in origin has a positive coefficient and unemployment in destination a negative coefficient. What we see for wages that the push factor is smaller than the pull factor, and for unemployment it's the other way around. Row density is not significant. in the region of origin, but it is significant in the region of destination, and it is with the right sign. Distance is negative as expected. With regard to the results for gender, education and age, we see that on average the results are very similar to the model for total commuter flows. Only for females, some coefficients are less significant, and we see the same for education of higher educated and for the age group over 45. So on the one hand, the numbers are smaller. On the other hand, it's well known that females have a lower commuting rates than males, and this may also make it for them less attractive to move cross-border, because usually these are longer distances. Education, higher educated show much more flexible migration patterns and also commuting patterns, because they can easily travel longer distance. Sometimes they don't have to be at work from 9 o'clock till 5 o'clock or all shifts, but they can be more flexible in their working times, and it may make them less sensitive to these variables. For age, we know that elderly people are also commuting shorter distances because it's more cumbersome for them to commute. So these are the results. Then for the language dummies, what we see is all language dummies are significant and positive, implying that if the language on both sides of the border is the same, this leads to more cross-border commuting. There is one exception, that's Ireland, UK, but yeah, we all know that's very complicated because of the border between Northern Ireland and Ireland, and otherwise you have to cross the sea. So Ireland, UK is an outlier. Again, when we look at the difference by gender, education and age group, the results are largely the same as for the total model. So what can we conclude? Wages. The results are in line with expectations. Higher wages in the country of origin, lower commuting, and higher wages in the country of destination increases commuting. The push effect is smaller than the pull effect. For unemployment, the results are also in line with expectations. Higher unemployment in the region of origin increases commuting, and higher unemployment in destination lowers commuting, but the push factor is larger than the pull effect. Now, these are typically results related to the neoclassical model. Labor mobility responds to differences in wages and unemployment, and that is indeed what we find in a very robust way. Road accessibility, it works in the country of destination, which is in line with our expectation, but in the region of origin, it's not significant, and these are two counteractive forces, because better road density might lead also make it easier to find a job within the region where you live. Now, larger distances show the expected lower commuting rates. Partly this is due to the larger country effect, because we calculated the differences by having the distance between the center of the countries. Now, a large country then, as France, is of course others than Luxembourg, and then the possibility of commuting cross-border is lower. Now, common language increases commuting. By gender and educational group, the differences are small, but the effects for women and higher educated are often smaller and insignificant. Now, we did a further check by trying to estimate this same model by sector. And we have 4 broad sectors for which we have the data. And the data for the sectoral models are of a shorter period, only 2011 to 2016, where in the previous model we started in 1998. Now, which sectors do we have? Manufacturing and construction, what we call all services, trade, transport, storage, hotels, restaurants and cafes. New services, information, communication, financial services, rent, trade and real estate, and specialized business services. And finally, we have government services, the public administration with education and healthcare. Not taken into account because too many low and missing observations are agriculture and mining, and the sector culture, sports, recreation and other services. What do we find? The sectoral wages, as I mentioned, are only available for a shorter period. Now, first of all, some statistics. From the simple statistics, here you see the distribution of all unemployment over these sectors and also the commuters. And what stands out is that most commuters relatively are in the manufacturing sector and relatively low in the government service sector. For the old and new services, it's more or less equal to the share in total employment. Now, what do we find? Our model is the same as the previous one, with only the exception of the wage variable, because unemployment and other variables are not available by sector. Now, we have the sector-specific wages, and the results are a little disappointing. For the total model, so with total wages for all sectors, we find that in the wage in the country of destinations has the expected positive effect, but in the country of origin it's not significant, and this might be due to the shorter period, because in the previous model for the longer period both were significant with the right sign. For the sectoral wages, the results are disappointing, because manufacturing with most commuting, the coefficients for wages are insignificant, same in all services. For new services, they are significant, but only in the region of origin, but it has the wrong sign. That's not what we expect. And for the only good result we find for government services, a negative effect of wage in the region of origin and positive in the region of destination. But this is the sector where we don't expect it, because government services, yeah, it's a little bit strange if you commute to another country because you work in the government. But this might be due to that some people live in across the border for housing reasons and commute back to their original job in the government. But still, it's a bit strange. Now, the language dummies are more or less the same. I will not go into that. Conclusions. The results for the overall model for a shorter period are largely the same. No worries, nothing happened. The results for the overall model are quite okay, but the sectoral several language damage are insignificant. Sectoral wages, where we had the highest expectation, for new services, the wages in the living country is positive in contract with expectations, and this is the only anomaly. For government services, the coefficients are right, but we didn't expect it for this sector, that it's because it's government service are usually not open for commuters. All other coefficients are in line with results in table 1. So in that respect, the model is quite stable also if we estimate it for sectors. Unemployment, motorways, distance, language, they are all in line with the previous model. Now, our overall conclusions. Cross-border commuting flows are very small, but increase over time. There are potential gains, more economic activity due to scale and agglomeration effects. A better matching and lower unemployment might be the results. Empirical results, the lower wages and higher unemployment in the origin significantly increase the commuting, the push effect, lower the pull effect with destination countries. The magnitudes differ a bit by gender, education and age, and it's not always significant for all subgroups. Now, motorways has the expected sign in the country of destination, but insignificant in the country of origin. Language does it, except for Ireland and the UK. Distance is negative, and this is what we expect. And the models by sector perform similar, with the exception of the sectoral wages, for which we expected to see better results. So this is a bit disappointing. With regard to the effect on inequality and policy implications, now, what we can conclude is cross-border commuting flows respond in general in a theoretically expected way to wages and unemployment, and to accessibility, language similarity, and distance. So theory is able to predict the flows. And this means that cross-border commuting may help to reduce economic and territorial inequality. However, the effects are small, and the relative number because the relative number of commuters is small. The results differ by gender, education, and sector. So for these groups, the reduction in inequality might be much more limited. For instance, females who are much more reluctant to commute long distances. For them, cross-border commuting might not be an option to reduce an inequality. And if if these groups are less sensitive to differences in wages and employment and accessibility, it might not help them. Policy measures aimed at improving the economic conditions might reduce cross-border cross-border commuting. Because if the situation in the region of origin is improving, then there is less need to go to another job abroad. Policy measures aimed to reduce accessibility, language or institutional barriers might help to improve accessibility or diminish language and institutional barriers might help to further increase cross-border mobility and reduce inequalities. However, also it might reduce differences between regions within a country, because most of the time peripheral border regions suffer from higher unemployment, lower wages. Now, if they catch up, the differences also within a country are getting less. This is more or less the story I wanted to tell you. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, so thanks. Now it's time for questions and answers.
Okay. Hello, Jouke. Good to see you.
Yes.
Can you see me?
Yeah, I see you very clear and I hear you.
Okay, great. Yes, I have a couple of comments on your paper, which is great. Thank you for the presentation. One is about this, the effects of this spatial arbitrage in commuting, resulting from commuting. You suggest that this spatial arbitrage may reduce inequalities, which I basically agree, although the number of commuters is still low. Well, two issues. First, is the response of commuting to economic incentives increasing over time? So you have presented here a list of heterogeneity results by gender, by sector, etc. But maybe over time would be also just nice to see what happens before and after, I don't know, the midpoint of your data set, if you have it, okay? So if you have a panel or you have some different periods of time, it would be great just to see if this response to economic conditions has improved over time, as we have seen already in the other presentations that the share of commuters is increasing. This is the first question. And second, even if the scale is small, if it would be nice, maybe it's another exercise, but it would be nice just to evaluate if, in fact, cross-border regions are improving relative to the rest of the countries, okay? Thanks to this improvement in the mobility and the accessibility of facilities for mobility, etc. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for your question. Yeah, we know that the number of commuters is increasing over time. But if we estimate the model for separate periods, as you saw, we estimated the model for the sectors for a shorter period from 2011 to 2016. And also for the overall model, the results were weaker. So that does not indicate that we really think that the incentives are increasing over time. And the coefficients for the smaller period are in the same magnitude, but it's difficult to compare them because the period is different.
Hello, can you hear me? Can you
yes, I
hear me? Okay, thank you for the presentation. I had doubt about the type of data that you are using in your empirical analysis, but Raul just confirmed that you use regional data and not national data for the wages and employment rates. Maybe you can confirm that. Are you using the national level or at the regional level?
Yeah, no, we use national data because we have data problems. We have done another study for commuting between the Netherlands, Germany, and Belgium, where we used regional data.
Oh, okay. So
but unfortunately, yeah, we have to stick to national data.
Because of course, the national average wage or unemployment rate in a country is not really representative of the wage or the unemployment rate you have in the bordering regions. So this might be important. But the other thing I have in mind is that we just saw in the papers before the break that commuting flows have also an influence on wages and employment rates. We saw in the paper on Switzerland that the French regions or municipalities sending more commuters to Switzerland after the liberalization experienced an increase in maybe employment, but we saw an increase in the hourly wage. So the wages and unemployment levels are clearly affected by commuting. If commuters are going to Luxembourg and they were unemployed, let's say in Belgium before, of course unemployment is going to decrease. So how is this reverse causation problem be dealt with, or how could it be dealt with?
First of all, we didn't deal with it. We recognize the problem, but we don't know how to solve it in this in this context. We are still thinking about it. So suggestions are more than welcome.
Then I think twice about that.
But with this data we have, and with the many countries, it's very complicated.
So there is time for the last question, if any. Is there any question from the online audience? Okay, so Jouke, many thanks for your interesting presentation and for presenting the paper regardless this situation, and see you soon, possibly here in Barcelona or in any other place. Thank you.
Yes, I will switch off now. Thank you very much. I will switch off now and try to recover as soon as possible. So thank you that I could present it in this way.
Thanks. Okay, so now there is the next presentation by Arnaud Mertens, Please try to share your, the slides are already there, so you can start whenever you want.
Okay, so do you see my, yes, PowerPoint? Yes, I think so. Okay, so first, hello, and thank you for inviting me. I'm Arnaud Mertens. I'm a PhD candidate at the Luxembourg Institute of Economic Research. And today I will speak about the effects of commuting time, work, absenteeism. I will provide evidence from cross-border workers in Luxembourg. So, as you know, commuting is a significant part of many workers' daily life. The time dedicated to commuting has increased over the last few years in many Western countries, and in Luxembourg, more than 26% of residents commute more than 40 minutes to work and come back from work. But I believe this case is actually even more severe for Luxembourg, since more than 45% of Luxembourg employment is composed of other workers. In 2019, there were...
Excuse me, can you try to either use a microphone or just get closer to your computer, because we cannot hear you very well.
Okay. I don't have a microphone here, but that's fine.
Just stay closer, so don't move that much.
Okay. So, is it better? Is it better?
I think so.
Okay. In 2019, 192,000 workers were living actually outside Luxembourg borders. And so it's very likely that an even larger share of workers takes more than 40 minutes to get to work and therefore to come back, especially when you know that 1/3 of employers are located in Luxembourg City, so the very heart of Luxembourg. So understanding the effect of commuting on individuals is key. We know that commuting has pros and cons. Among the few advantages of commuting, we can say that, well, if you are able to commute longer distances, then you can increase the search radius for jobs, which allows a higher density of labor markets and in turn a better matching for job offers. It's also a nice opportunity to have more choices for places of residence and therefore better budget control. But commuting comes at a cost with several disadvantages. One of them is the negative side for the environment, because long commutes are often done by cars. But today I want to speak about the negative effects on physical health, since it's reducing time to engage in physical activities, and the negative effect for mental health, since it's a source of daily stress, it's a source of burnout. So more generally, it's simply reducing the time available for yourself. We know that commuting is one of the least pleasurable activities you can do in one day. So these effects might increase employee absenteeism, for instance, by increasing shirking behaviors or by worsening health status of workers. What I mean when I say shirking is simply to avoid work because of long commutes, for instance. So you might decide to shirk because you want to compensate for longer commute. So today I will tackle two research questions. First, how commuting time affects work absenteeism, and second, what are the potential factors involved in this relationship? Only a few research studies have tackled this research question. Some concluded that commuting distance and commuting time are positively linked to absenteeism, while some others say, well, we don't find any robust relationship between absences and distance. So I want to make steps a bit clearer today with the following framework. So the basic idea of my framework today is that in absence of any shock to commuting time, people are like in equilibrium. And if there is a sudden increase in commuting time, so if there is a shock, then people find themselves in disequilibrium. And when facing this case, people might react asymmetrically, notably depending on their gender, on their worker status, so whether they are self-employed or employees, their mode of transport, the commuting distance, etc. To study this, I will use data on a specific population. The specific population is the Luxembourg private sector workers residing in Belgium or France between 2015 and 2019. The source of my data is the IGSS. IGSS stands for Inspection Générale de la Sécurité Sociale. Those are administrative microdata covering workers affiliated to Luxembourg Social Security System. I have to say this quite contrast with other studies, since all the other studies that I found were survey-based studies. My data are available at a monthly frequency, and I have socio-demographic characteristics of workers, like the age, the citizenship, etc. I also have the absences of workers, obviously, and the reasons of the absences. So, for instance, I know whether people are absent for illness reasons, for family reasons, etc. I know the characteristics of the jobs and employers. What I don't know is the transport mode of my population, since I have administrative data. This is not recorded by the state. But I don't think it's a problem, since here we are focusing on cross-border workers residing in Belgium or France and working in Luxembourg. So it's very unlikely that active commuting is a big part of the commuting here. So with this data, what we like is a description, and hopefully I found one. Today I will use the following description. This is some roadworks that happened on the E411 in Belgium. The E411 in Belgium is a big highway connecting Belgium and Luxembourg, and some roadworks occurred from September 17, 2018 to April 30, 2019. The aim of the roadworks was to construct an additional lane on the highway, to construct a carpool lane. It translates into a short-term impact by reducing the number of lanes to one lane and reducing the speed on the highway. The speed was limited to 50 kilometers per hour. Obviously, this results in traffic congestion, and it leads to what I think an exogenous increase in commuting time. What is nice in our case, but not so nice for Belgium, is that the Belgian Minister Henri declared in 2021 that at the moment these roadworks look like useless work. So based on this declaration, and since almost nobody is using this additional carpool lane, I believe there is no structural change implied by these roadworks. Was it a strong disruption? I think it was a strong disruption. I found actually some newspapers briefs saying that some people were not able to see their children anymore because of roadworks. So they had to leave earlier to go to work, and they had to come back really late. Also, it was not possible to avoid traffic jams. Some people thought about passing by small villages along the E411 in Belgium, but it was, I mean, the villages were already congested before the roadworks, so it was not a possibility to save time commuting. So with this framework, with these roadworks, and with this data, we have a disruption affecting one part of our population, people living along the E411 in Belgium, during a definite period. And that could sound like a good setup for difference in differences. So here is my difference in differences estimation. I consider three different groups. The main treatment group I'm interested in is the group along the E411 in Belgium, so on the left on the map. But I will compare with baseline control group composed of people living along the A31 in France. I have an additional control group that I use for robustness checks that is composed of people living in Belgium, in the north of Luxembourg, or on the north of the. I obviously do several robustness checks to test whether the parallel trends assumption fails for the difference in difference estimation. And it never fails, so it's quite good. So let's look at the model we will use. The model we'll use is a fixed effects linear model estimated with OLS. I include in the model some year and month dummies that are interacted actually. also include a rich set of individual time-varying characteristics, and the coefficient of interest will be in a model gamma, which is the coefficient of the interaction between dt, which is demi-variable identifying the period covered by the road description, and affected zone, which is a demi-variable equal to 1 for the treatment group. The dependent variable will be equal to 1 if there is at least one absence in the month for the worker and 0 otherwise. So we could rephrase the research question as, do disruption increase the probability of having at least 1 day of absence in a month? I have to say that I also run robustness checks with a continuous dependent variable and find similar conclusions. Finally, the standard errors are clustered at the individual level. So first, let's look at our two main groups. So the treatment group and the group of people composed of people along the A31 in France. What we see is that the groups are relatively homogeneous. So we have the same share of women among the two groups, similar categories, similar foreign share, etc. We slightly observe some differences in working conditions. So for instance, we have more temporary contracts in France and therefore higher salaries in Belgium. I believe this is not a problem in our case, since I include some controls in my equation to control, especially for these slight differences. So now let's look at a figure showing the absenteeism of the treatment group, so people along the E411 in Belgium, by disruption status over different distance categories. So what I mean by disruption status is basically whether we are in a period affected by roadworks or not. And what we see is that no matter at which distance you live from your work, you will be, people are on average more absent during roadworks. Okay. So now I think we can dive into the results. First, before speaking about the coefficient of interest, I can have a quick look at the controls. Basically, the controls are in line with what we would expect. So for instance, the age is related to absenteeism. We observe a peak at 34, and that might be simply explained by people having new parenting responsibilities at this age on average. We also observe that permanent contracts are positively linked to absenteeism. People unable to work from home are also absent, etc. So this is quite in line with what we would expect. Now, if we look at the coefficient of interest, so remember it's the double interaction between affected zone and roadworks period. So it's the third row in my table in column 1. We see that the description increases absenteeism by 0.52%. My guess here is that it's creating an imbalance in the lives of individuals between work activities and leisure. And so people might compensate this imbalance by being more absent. To put this number, so 0.52%, into perspective, what you could know is that without any disruption, workers are absent at least once a month, 16.3% of the time. So our coefficient here for this specific roadworks period is small, but significant. Now, if we look at the column 6, I interact the interaction of interest with the distance, and I find that individuals commuting more than 40 kilometers are 0.92% more absent than individuals living within 15 kilometers in case of disruption. Okay. Now, let's slightly change the dependent variable. In column 1, we still have the same model as before, nothing changed, it's just for comparison purposes, okay? But now in column 2, 3, and 4, I consider absence for illness, injury, and family reasons, respectively. So for instance, the binary dependent variable will be equal to 1 in column 2 if there is at least one absence for illness reason in a month for worker. And what do we observe based on this? First, we observe that illness and family reasons are positively linked to the description. But we also observe that the description does not seem to affect absenteeism for injury reasons. And so the question might be, why? Well, you might think of sample size issue. I'm not so sure, since 7% of people have at least once an injury in our data set, and there are almost 3 times more absences for injury reasons than for family reasons, for instance, while family reasons coefficient is significant. So my guess is that it's a mix of shocking behavior from people, so people picking absences, and real increase in absences, for instance, for illness reasons, because, yes, the commuting decrease health status of people. A twist here is that I also look to see whether people concentrate their absences in the 2 first days, because in Luxembourg you can take up to 2 consecutive days off before having to justify any illness. And what I find, but I don't show here in a table, is that additional absences resulting from roadworks are mainly composed of absences of up to 2 days. Then I won't show you the tables today, but I investigate the link between roadworks description and various factors. For instance, I see that having a permanent contract surprisingly reduces the effect of a description on absenteeism. We also see that the more you earn, the less you are absent. And finally, people are more absent if their contract ends soon. I think this is quite logical, but what I mean by contract ending very soon is that people with a contract ending this month will be very likely to be absent, while if their contract ends in 3 months, they won't be so much absent because of these roadworks. And my guess is that it is because they don't often know whether the contract will be renewed, and so they want to show the best fits. I also investigate other notable factors, but I do not conclude in any difference in the effect of the description. So, for instance, I investigated the age, gender, employer size, and work from home ability, but I didn't conclude anything regarding these factors. Then I obviously tried a battery of robustness checks. I, for instance, tried various specifications, for instance, replacing the control group 1 composed of people living along the A31, and I replaced this group by people living in the north of Luxembourg, so control group 2. What I wanted was to find a similar effect, and what I found is indeed a similar effect, so it's good. I also tried other stuffs like excluding the period after roadworks, and I found similar results again. Then I investigated the parallel trends assumption with placebo regressions. So for instance, I did a fake treatment group composed of people in control group 2 that I compared with people in control group 1. And what I wanted, obviously, in this case was to find no effect, and that's indeed what I found. I also did some fake roadworks period, and again, I found a result that were in line with what I wanted to find. So overall, I would say that the parallel trend assumption is quite robust in this case, even if we cannot test per se this parallel trends assumption. So now, if I tentatively try to conclude, since it's still an ongoing project, we can see that commuting is a very time-consuming activity for many workers in Luxembourg, and not really a pleasant activity. My guess at the start of this work was that it would affect work absenteeism, and the results show that indeed commuting time seems to affect absenteeism. The description increased actually absenteeism by 0.3 52%. And to put this in perspective, without any disruption, workers are absent at least once a month, 16.3% of the time. So it's equivalent to a percentage increase of having at least 1 day of absenteeism of roughly 3.2%. This is quite big, seen like that. The disruption only significantly increases family and illness-related absences. And also, as I said before, individuals are suddenly more absent for periods of no more than 2 days. So periods that people don't have to really justify according to law in Luxembourg. So that could be because of shirking in this case. And I think it's interesting to see. I investigated other factors that could play a role in this relationship. I identified some of them, for example, distance, having a permanent contract, hourly wage, and the contract termination date. We will continue to explore a bit this factor in the coming weeks and months, but I will be happy to have your input regarding this. Thank you for your attention. I hope it was interesting.
No, thank you very much for one comment related to that. I'm not sure.
Sorry, can you? I don't hear you well.
Okay, now it's better.
Yeah, it's better.
Okay, so I have two comments. One related to the control variables that you have. Is it possible to include private public sector control? I assume that there are not so many cross-border commuters that are public sector workers in Luxembourg, but it would be nice to check in case it is, if there is any difference. And the second is a more methodological suggestion. Perhaps, as far as you have shown that there are differences between the treatment and the control group, you can apply some kind of matching algorithm, propensity or quotient exact matching, and then with the balance group, carry out the diff in diff. This will allow you to provide a robustness check just in order to see whether after controlling for observables and non-observables, the results hold or not. Of course, you will lose part of the richness of this analysis regarding the factors that influence absenteeism, but I think that methodologically it would be more robust. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your comment. Regarding the first point, that would be nice, but actually, we requested the data to the IGSS, Inspection Générale de la Sécurité Sociale, and it was part of the deal that we would not have public data. So in this case, I won't be able to extend, data regarding public sector. So in this case, I won't be able to explore this further. I focus my analysis on private sector. Regarding the second question, yes, that's definitely something we could try, actually. Yeah, thank you for your comment. I will investigate this a bit further.
We do not know each other. In fact, Arnaud, I'm from LISER as well, as you know.
Yeah.
Okay, we should meet at some point. Very fast question. So you identify this effect of the construction of this lane on the motorway, let's say, on absenteeism, but you have also the post-construction phase. So just to see if it's a symmetric effect or not, or if there is inertia in the way people reacted, can you also look at the effect of these construction ex post? In principle, it reduces the time, the commuting time for Belgian people, even if the Minister Henri in Belgium said it's not the case. But do you find an effect when you compare your control group and your treated group ex post?
So we did not try yet this, but I would assume we don't observe really any effect on this, since actually I read the research on this saying that on average 30 cars are taking this additional carpool lane every day. So it's an investment of 21 million for 30 cars. It's really nothing. I don't think it will really affect the structural dynamic of this.
Well, I also have a question, well, a couple of questions which are more, let's say, methodological. First, as far as I can see from your equations, you have year times months fixed effects, right? Plus, and then you also put the dummy for the post, let's say, post-treatment period. I think this is redundant. That is, once you control for time, for year and month fixed effects, so there is no need to add an additional dummy that is equal to 1 if the observation is taken after the treatment. Is it clear?
Yes. Actually, so the dummy is identifying is an interaction between the period of description and the zone affected by the roadwork. So yes.
But this is the indicator for that is the treatment effect. That is the interaction is the coefficient attached to this interaction is your coefficient of interest. But then you also include, as far as I can understand, a dummy that is equal to 1 for the post period.
Oh, no, I don't include, sorry. Let me check.
It's D, capital D with T subscript.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. The equation is a bit old. Sorry. I did not notice it was an old equation, but yes, I don't include this actually in my regression. Yes, this is a typo, sorry.
Okay, and then I'm not completely sure you have to cluster the standard errors at the individual level. So at the end, the treatment varies at the local level, so at the area. So all the individuals who live in the same place are affected by the treatment if they are in the treatment group and in the post-treatment period. And they also are subject to the same shocks. So therefore, if I correctly understand, you should cluster the standard errors at the local or area level. So which is the level of variation of the treatment of interest. Okay.
I have to say I will investigate this a bit further. We saw that clustering at the individual level was a nice way to control for variation, trivial variations. But yes, I will see whether. So you would suggest to control by group, by treatment group, for instance, control group, etc.
Excuse me, I cannot hear you very well. Can you repeat?
So your suggestion is to control by group or by smaller?
No, it's the cluster of the standard errors. Yeah. So you cluster at the individual level, okay? Because you have many individuals observed different time periods. This is what you have to do if you just exploit the panel dimension of the data. But in a diff, as far as I can understand, you have to cluster at the level of variation of the treatment, which is the geographical level.
Okay, I will about that. Thank you.
More questions? I have a couple of questions myself. First is about the use of an alternative measure. Let's say not just if you miss this day of work or not, but just aggregating them into I don't know, monthly number of days you missed. Okay. This would be another variable, which I don't know, negative binomial model or something like this. Just investigating is people just driving crazy because of the traffic jam. I don't know, but this is one alternative. Maybe you can check. Yes, it's an additional. And then I was thinking about confounding factors. I don't know about Belgium or Luxembourg. I don't know about if people is not just very stressed because you don't have a government for 2 years or something like that. I don't know. So I guess this is very local information, and it's very likely that only you can think about it. I'm for sure I'm not, but maybe you're. Catalan refugees, yes, as we are being suggested around, yeah. Well, that's it.
Yes. So sorry, your first point, I missed your.
So yeah, the first is yes, alternative measures of absenteeism. Because rather than 0.01, just looking at the number of absenteeism day, and the second is about potential confounding factors.
Yes. So actually, we investigate this in some robustness checks. We do like a Poisson regression, for instance. We find similar results, but I mean, not similar in terms of magnitude, but the sign is similar and they are significant. We wanted to focus on this 0.1 dependent variable since we want to see whether some people that are usually not absent are suddenly more absent. Are suddenly absent. While we less expect that people that are, for instance, usually absent like 5 days a month will be more absent because they will simply not face the same difficulties of this commuting since they won't be affected, for instance, 5 days during this month since they are already absent. So, yes, that was our approach.
Thank you.
Yes. And regarding the confounding factors, yes, that's definitely something we try to identify. We did not identify anything that could be really big over and significant over the last year that we identified. So we have 5 years of analysis and we didn't see any element that could cause a bias here. But if you have any idea,
I don't know, Belgium defeating Germany or something like this in a football match. Beyond that, I don't know.
Is there any other question? Okay, thank you so much. So we can start now the last presentation by Eduardo Medeiros. Can you please?
Do you see the PowerPoint?
No, not yet.
Okay. You see it?
Yeah, now it works.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. First of all, I would like to congratulate the organization for this interesting and timely event. It's a pity I cannot be in Barcelona now, but let's see in the future. So as you can see here, the article was submitted by 2 persons, me and the Secretary General of the AEBR, which is Dr. Martín Guillermo Ramírez. Is at the moment in celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Association of European Border Regions, so we cannot be present. So our presentation is entitled Mitigating Barriers to Cross-Border Commuting and Increasing Institutional Trust via this initiative, new initiative. This is called B-Solutions. So in short, the presentation will debate the potential contribution of this EU B-Solutions initiative to stimulate cross-border commuting in Europe. So we started to identify some cross-border commuting determinants, which were already covered by some of the presentations. Which include the age, which tend to be around 40 years, the majority, the gender, mainly men. The level of education tend to be higher levels of education, was already explained here in some presentations. So, and the existence of children also affects, and the presence of older family members. So the economic structure, the open-mindedness. So there's a few factors here that affect cross-border commuting. But what we try to relate is these cross-border commuting determinants and the barrier effect typology, which according to us encompasses 5 main dimensions: institutional barriers, which can include first and foremost legal and administrative ones, which are the ones that are covered by the B Solutions initiative. Physical accessibility related barriers, which include cross-border public transports, roads, railways, social cultural related barriers, like language, which is most important, economic and technological related barriers, which include economic disparities, for instance, the communication. And also important is environmental related barriers, such as lack of agreements between countries in managing cross-border natural protected areas. So this figure summarizes this linking between these 5 main barrier effect dimensions and their relevance in influencing cross-border commuting flows. Here it's possible to see that legal and administrative barriers, as well as physical accessibilities, have several crucial elements influencing cross-border commuting. Most of these are considered by UB Solutions, as well as some others that are including in the, for instance, social cultural domain, like multilingualism, and economic technology barrier, like e-government. Relatively recent EU surveys, indeed, these surveys were made in the past 3 years, indicate persisting border barriers in Europe, and have shown a consistent pattern in which legal and administrative barriers coupled with language and physical accessibility related barriers are seen as the ones that affect more negatively the lives of cross-border commuters and citizens that have to cross the border either on a daily basis or even as a tourism. In many cases, these relate to different legislations on labor markets, education, social security, health, and transportation. So these cross-border barriers affect cross-border commuting, and there is another pool that shows more or less the same thing. Also, this one from 2017. So in this context, the UB Solutions initiative, which aims to mitigate cross-border obstacles, which are caused by lack of coherence, inconsistencies, and or overlapping between legal provisions or administrative procedures in every side of the border, can have a proactive positive impact on the lives of cross-border commuters in several domains like institutional cooperation, employment, health, public transports, multilingualism, and e-government. So by now, there is already approved 90 projects. So it's a lot of projects in 4 different calls since 2020. And as you can see here, with institutional cooperation and employment, health, public transports leading the way as the ones, the areas that are covered more by this initiative. So we have also a detailed list of projects from the first pilot actions and then the subsequent approved. And you can see here that they cover a lot of areas like cross-border mobility, cross-public mobility plans, health issues, education-related issues. This is the last ones, the last 2 calls. We don't have time to be in detail on this one, but you can look at this map. Figure 3 presents kind of an unbalanced geographical picture in which these B solutions have been implemented. So they favor a few cross-border areas, such as ones around Benelux and Western Germany, which is an area that was already very much discussed in these panels. And also, curiously, in Iberian Peninsula, the border between Portugal and Spain, and in between France and Germany, as also France and Spain, there's also a lot of projects, as you can see, from different domains. Here you can see basically this, not the precise location, but the number of projects in each of the areas, and you can see also that it is possible to confirm that some areas don't have so many projects going on in reducing these border obstacles. So on the missing borders, some of them, there are submitted cases, but they did not pass the selection process. So it doesn't mean that, there were not stakeholders trying to solve issues in their borders, but they were not selected. As regards multilingualism, I would expect, for instance, to see more projects around Germany, because German is definitely a barrier, a linguistic barrier in Europe. But probably those with language problems in their borders also find it very difficult to answer the form and instructions that is necessary to apply for the B solutions, which is provided in English. So very often this has meant a major obstacle also for local authorities to submit their cases. So this might also, I think that there's a very complicated form. Some of them find it complicated, and they simply give up. This is the information I received. So as the European Commission and also the AEBR, which is the Association of European Border Regions, they are currently thinking in making a friendlier interface to attract more customers, so that this map is more is better distributed, not so much concentrated on the same cross-border areas. In this regard, I think the AEBR has tried to address all public authorities and EU internal and land borders to improve the communication in English, and this has probably not reached the appropriate person. So AEBR has made a massive sending of paper copies of the first compendium that they produced with the conclusions of the first two calls of the B solutions. But even so, the participation has been lower than expected. In conclusion, the institutional, legal, administrative barriers alongside physical accessibility barriers are the most influential to cross-border commuting flows. Here, the barriers resulting from the presence of different legal administrative systems, lack of institutional trust, or reduced presence of lack of public transport are significant obstacles to cross-border commuting across European border areas. Likewise, persisting cultural barriers, such as the presence of different languages on both sides of the border and economic disputes, also influence cross-border commuting flows. So mostly focused on promoting the reduction in legal and administrative border barriers in Europe, the Analyze UB Solutions initiative has supported cases which encompass all the previous mentioned border barriers, which you can see there, affecting cross-border commuting, like institutional cooperation, employment, health, public transport, e-government information services. As such, UB Solutions, they hold the potential to prove to be a formidable and practical solution to foster cross-border mobility across European borders. So the main lessons learned so far by the implementation of the 19 cases via the UB solutions across 27 cross-border regions and 21 member states, it demonstrates the importance of institutional commitment and multi-level involvement of politicians and policymakers at different levels to reduce these borders all across European borderlines. Equally important was the realization that the UB solutions has shown that complementarity types of responses not directly related to removing specific legal or administrative obstacles can be very effective in mitigating the negative impacts caused by such obstacles. Indeed, they have contributed to highlight the need to amend the legal administrative framework within the cross-border cooperation projects, the Interreg program, the HEI, the cross-border cooperation. Moreover, a place-based approach entailing a thorough research and evidence-based analysis of each analyzed obstacles should be performed, considering the specificity of each border area. So the data resulting from this analysis must be, however, shared with stakeholders for increasing capacity building to making informed policy decisions aiming at tackling cross-border obstacles in a more effective and efficient manner. By now, we are living in the COVID-19 pandemic, which has triggered an unprecedented COVID fencing process, the shutdown of borders across Europe due to this pandemic. So it is still difficult to know what is going to happen in post-pandemic times. No one can really be certain of what is going to happen to cross-border community flows. What is necessary is to continue to support these kind of projects, like the B solutions, to produce the necessary updated and detailed knowledge on persisting legal administrative barriers, which limit a full European territorial integration process and related cross-border commuting flows as a concrete policy measure to attain this desired European territorial integration policy goal. So as stated in this recent European Commission report from 2021, vibrant cross-border labor markets with intense cross-border commuting require that European cross-border regions should be seen as a single territory with mitigated cross-border barriers, not only when regards accessing public services, but also when it comes to access the social security, skills, competences, education and training, and not ultimately employment. So only by then European cross-border commuting can be fully achieved. So my presentation, as you can see, was not so technical, was mostly focused on the implementation of these UB solutions initiatives, which as you could see, has a lot of connections with the goal of the conference, with by mitigating these legal and administrative barriers, all of these barriers that you could see the B solutions cover, there is this potential to reduce, by reducing the border barriers, to increase cross-border commuting, cross-border mobility across Europe, which is the ultimate goal of this conference. So thank you for your attention.
There is time, plenty of time for questions.
Yeah, I didn't have my camera on. I don't know why.
Hi, Eduardo. Thank you very much for your presentation. I think that you had a very interesting insight on the policy perspective that somehow was not fully covered by the rest of the presentation. So thank you for this. One of your conclusions is that further cooperation is required between different levels of government, no, if I'm right? So
different levels of
government, no?
Yes.
Okay, so do you know any specific or any case study where this cooperation is carried out at the level of public employment services? Because I think that sharing information about vacancy, jobs at each part of the border would clearly provide an efficient solution to the problem of mismatch for some specific firms. Thank you.
Well, I actually made a report for AEBR and the European Commission. I had to read all these reports that were detailed in each case studies. So I made this around a year ago, so I don't have this fresh in my mind, but I remember a case in, I think it was in Belgium and Holland, in which these institutions from several special levels, like the government, the regional level, the local level, they were very actively involved in trying to solve a specific legal problem. So this is happening especially in the areas, cross-border areas in Europe, where this cross-border cooperation is more mature, is older, of course, and is more intense, like all around Benelux. In the areas like in border areas like between Portugal and Spain, it's more common that these institutional arrangements are made at the same territorial level, like regionals, work on the regions with the other side, and local stakeholders, they work with local stakeholders. So it depends on the degree of maturity of cross-border cooperation. It's institutional cooperation. As you know, in Portugal and Spain, we have different administrative levels. Portugal doesn't have a regional level like Spain, so this makes it more difficult to make this institutional cooperation. But in in other areas like around Luxembourg and between Germany and Netherlands, this is probably easier to be made.
Thank you. Questions? I have a comment, not a question. It's a comment about the European projects and the salary associated with them, just for researchers, okay, which makes them much more profitable for academics from the south of Europe than from the north of Europe. So that this is just a comment about the lack of projects, for instance, in Germany or in several other countries. Very likely that we are more prone just to ask for European projects in the specific countries than somewhere else. This might be, I don't know if this is behind that, okay, and the lack of experiences in several countries, but it might be a reason. I don't know if you had a chance to chat it with other colleagues or just informally, but yeah, that's it. Yeah.
I cannot. It's very low, the sound.
Okay, I put it just in my teeth. Okay, now better.
It's better, yes.
Yeah. Okay. Now I was mentioning that the lack of projects around Germany and other countries which are above the average of income per capita in Europe might be connected with the way of funding as compared to Southern European countries.
It can be, yes, it can be. But you know, I spoke a lot with Martín Guillermo, which actually AEBR is managing this, and he never gave me this explanation. He always tells me that that has to do with sometimes lack of awareness from these entities that these solutions is actually being implemented. And that's, as you know, Martin is Spanish, and in Portugal there's a lot of good initiatives in Portugal and Spain with these GTCs. So there are institutions that are already established, you know, to capture these EU funds related to cross-border cooperation. So and they receive these newsletters from frequently from several sources, which makes them very much aware of what is going on and what kind of funds are there to finance their activities, which is promoting cross-border cooperation. Maybe this is not so well established in some other cross-border cooperation areas. And now I'm using the source that I have, which is the person that actually is managing these solutions. Martín Guillermo, unfortunately, cannot be here, so we will give you probably a more detailed answer on this. But this is the awareness that I have, because I'm an academic. I'm not managing this. So I don't know in specificity why not. And he also uses this explanation on the language. You know, these formularies, they are written in English, which makes sense because it's the language that is the global language in the world. So, and we all know that certain cultures in Europe, and this includes the Spanish culture, the French culture, they are very, very, very close to culture, different cultures. And then you have, you know, some persons probably in other parts of Europe that are like in Germany, that are not willing to, you know, access these documents and fill up these documents in English. They have to fill up in their own language. It's also a cultural issue here. And I come from a country, Portugal, which we are very open to use other sorts of language. Because if I cross the border, go to Spain, it's completely different. You know, they have to translate everything in Spanish. You know, that's a cultural issue also going on. That sometimes makes it difficult for applying to this kind of opportunities, because this is a great opportunity. There's a lot of money, and I've been into deep with this initiative and very close contact with the European Commission. And the idea is to expand it. You know, and there will be more money on this because it's actually a very successful initiative. And if you go to OECD, they already have a page there and a study on how this has been a very successful initiative. So I think there will be far more money after this fourth call. So you know, the countries and the local authorities should be aware of this, and they should use it, because it has actually promoted the reduction of legal administrative barriers, which are, you know, the barriers that cross-border commuters face with higher intensity, as we all know.
Thank you. I think it's great news. So the topic of interest of this workshop is plenty of money in the future. So this is good news. So, thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay, many thanks to all the presenters and all the audience for the nice presentations, the wonderful comments, and especially to the organizers, Vicente and Raul. And I think we are done, and now there will be a little closing address by Vicente Royela.